studying.
Right.
Um, I'll say it's a little bit of a convoluted explanation for the melody.
Sorry.
Uh, it's the one that's "I will rejoice," and
I know.
it's quite all
I
right.
have other things on my screen that are obscuring my.
It's it's
Was, how can I take away the waiting room? Can I not? Sorry, I'm just. There we go. Okay.
There we go. Okay. Like I said, slightly complicated explanation, but I'll say it in one sentence, which is that I am parodying myself. This is a melody that I wrote for a poem called Lech Besimcha by Ibn Ezra, that I based in part on a Turkish Sephardi melody for El Nora Alila. So I think that the complicated nature of how this melody came to be is also connected to the complicated mixture of emotions that we're all feeling right now: happiness to be with one another, fear at what's going on in the world around us, which I think is also reflected in the back and forth in moods in the psalm that we've been studying as well. So it's kind of, for me, all connected. All right. So this is אשמח ואל צווח זמרה שמך עליון. אשמח ואל צווח זמרה שמך עליון. עוד הוויה בכל ליבי, אספרה כל נפלאותיך. עוד הוויה בכל ליבי, אספרה כל נפלאותיך. אשמח ואל צווח זמרה שמך עליון. אשמח ואל צווח זמרה שמך עליון. עוד הוויה בכל ליבי, אספרה כל נפלאותיך. עוד הוויה בכל ליבי, אספרה כל נפלאותיך. אשמח ואל צווח זמרה שמך עליון. אשמח ואל צווח זמרה שמך עליון. אשמח ואל צווח זמרה שמך עליון. אשמח ואל צווח, אז זמרה שמך עליון, אז זמרה שמך עליון, אז זמרה שמך עליון.
Wow, would you leave that up there for a second? Yeah, that is fantastic, Jacob. Wow, that is amazing. And I can actually hear the El Nora Alila in that. So, wow, that's really beautiful. And the rhythms are so different, aren't they, for the Turkish Fardi? Wow, that's fantastic. I want to point out to everybody, now that you have these two verses or four phrases online, there are many who point out that that this psalm, and actually Psalm 10, is a continuing acrostic, which means that the first letter of, it's not exactly the same in each sentence, but that it starts with Aleph, and you'll see, we'll look through the psalm and you'll see Aleph being the first letter of the alphabet. And you can see actually in this example that the entire the first two verses both start with Aleph. And this really makes it stand out. But we'll see that maybe when we finish the psalm. And some people think that Psalm 9 and 10 were originally, or might be meant to be said as a unit, even if they're two psalms, because the acrostic system continues. The acrostic, meaning that the first letter of a sentence or the first letter of a paragraph or the first continues in alphabetical form, was a very common form in biblical poetry because it also helps, if it's an oral tradition, having it as an acrostic. First of all, it's fun, but it also helps you remember, right? You can, so there are several psalms that are, and don't get too hung up on the details, because you'll see sometimes it skips a sentence, it's not so precise, but we can see an acrostic in the whole psalm. But this really indicates there's a lot of alephs in the beginning of these four phrases of the first two psukim. So you can see why people see. So thank you, that was really beautiful. And the melody certainly matches those words for me. So Yael, can you share the whole psalm? And why don't we read it, since we're starting again with a new week? Shall you and I read it through the whole thing? And then we'll go back to the verses where we, if I can remember, where we left off. I
Uh,
can't tell you how happy I am to see everybody. Your punims make me so happy. Okay, Psalm 9, and I'll read this translation, but I've got a few. Obviously, we're looking at a lot of different ones.
do you want me to start in the
Yeah, I
Hebrew?
think just start with Aleph. But for those of you who watch the acrostic this time as we go through, see if you can find the Aleph Bet Gimel. You'll see what I mean. It's not precisely every line. And some, by the way, some printings of the psalm, for instance, Richard Levy puts in bold the letter to create so you can more easily see the acrostic. But look for it as we read through. Okay, Yael, you start.
למנצח אלמות לבן, מזמור לדוד.
For the leader, Amut Laben, whatever that means, a psalm of David.
אודה אדוני בכל ליבי, אספרה כל נפלאותיך.
I will praise you, Lord, with all my heart. I will tell all your wonders. And this is what we just were singing with Jacob.
אשמחה ואעלצה בך, אזמרה שמך עליון.
I will rejoice and exult in you, singing a hymn to your name, O Most High.
בשוב אויבי אחור, ייכשלו ויאבדו מפניך.
So there's the bet. When my enemies retreat, they stumble to their doom at your presence.
כי עשית משפטי ודיני, ישבת לכיסא שופט צדק.
For you uphold my right and claim, enthroned as righteous judge.
גערת גויים, איבדת רשע, שמם מחית לעולם ועד.
You blast the nations, you destroy the wicked, you blot out their name forever. And there's the Gimel.
האויב תמו חרבות לנצח, וערים נטשת, אבד זכרם המה.
The enemy is no more, ruins everything, everlasting. You have torn down their cities, their very names are lost. Now here's the hey, so there's no dalid. So as I said, it's not a perfect acrostic.
ואדוני לעולם ישב, כונן למשפט כסאו.
Remember here the vav, which means end in modern Hebrew, in the beginning of the verse. And by the way, it is the next letter in the acrostic. In biblical Hebrew, it can mean anything from a conjunctive, like the word and, to a total disjunctive, like the word but or rather. And in this case, it means that but or rather. It's contrasting the following verses with the previous ones. But or rather, the Lord abides forever. He has set up his throne for judgment.
והוא ישפוט תבל בצדק, ידין לאומים במישרים.
Again, the vav, so we have several vavs, so it's staying in that acrostic, but it's staying with this emphasis of contrast. It is he who judges the world with righteousness, rules the peoples with equity.
ויהי אדוני משגב לדח, משגב לעיתות בצרה.
The Lord, and again, the vav is there because it's, again, focusing this really contrast with the earlier sentences. The Lord is a haven for the oppressed, a haven in times of trouble.
ויבטחו בך יודעי שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך, אדוני.
Again, the vav, but those who know your name trust you, for you do not abandon those who turn to you. I think we got up, no, we did 12, so let's finish, we'll keep going.
זמרו לאדוני יושב ציון, הגידו ועמים עלילותיו.
So the next letter of the acrostic is the Zion. Sing a hymn, Zamru, is from the same word, Zemer, Mizmor, Zamir. Sing a hymn to the Lord who reigns in Zion, declare his deeds among the peoples. Amin. I think we got up to 13, right? So now we'll start with looking at it a little bit more closely before we go back with Richard Levy and Alter. But okay, so let's go to 13.
כי דורש דמים אותם זכר, לא שכח צעקת עניים, or ענבים. It's hard to know.
Yeah, so it's hard to know because what this means is that it's printed aniim, but that's hard to understand what that means. So well, let's get to that. Okay, so ki doresh. Did we do this? No, I can't remember. Anybody remember? Anyway, I can't remember. Ki doresh damim otam zachar. So this is not the way. The English is quite the Hebrew rhythm is quite different. Literally, ki is because or for or as a result of. So for doresh, doresh damim otam zachar. So he does not ignore the cry of the afflicted. He pursues the blood of them remembered. Okay, just hold on to that. Lo shachach tza'akat. He doesn't forget. So lo shachach is the same, is a negative, right? Doesn't forget. Shachach means to forget. And zachar is to remember. So those are opposite words. But lo shachach is a repetition. Lo shachach tza'akat, the cries, anavim or anim, which is a very hard to understand exactly what. So he who requites bloodshed is mindful of them. He doesn't forget the cries of. So this translation is trying to use looking like using things a little bit from both sides of the phrases. So I want to read to you what how Levi does this sentence. Although we'll look more carefully because this is a very interesting. This is 13, right, or 12.
I have Levi on the screen.
Okay, good. So you see how he translated so the anavim means, so you see the way Levi has aniim in small print. It means that's how it's printed in the text, but we should read it anavim. Anavim means somebody who's humble or restrained. So for the one who attends to the bloodshedders, keeps these in mind, lo shachach tza'akat, and doesn't forget the groaning of humble people. It's a very hard grammatical verse, and so you see that quite different between this and Sepharia. Okay, let's go back to Sepharia. Thank you for being 14.
Chaneneni. That's a hard one. Chaneneni Adonai re'e oni misonai meromemi misha'arei mavet.
And it's really a hard one. Have mercy on me, Yud He Vav He, Re'eh, the word to see, Lir'ot, Tir'u, Re'eh is a very standard word for to see. See, Ani'i, now. This is why, look at how similar it is to the word Anavim or Ani'im, because affliction would be Ani, or being oppressed. See my affliction, misonai, at the hands of my foes. Miromimi, this is from the word larom, to lift up. Resh, yud, or vav mem, lift up. Misha'arei mavet. Sha'ar is a gate, like Sha'ar Yafo in Jerusalem is a gate, Sha'ar, or in San Francisco, the LGBT synagogue is called Shar Zahav, Golden Gate, because of the Golden Gate Bridge. So Sha'ar is a very standard word for gate of Mavet, gates of death. That's quite not standard. That's quite a heavy concept. Okay, 15.
למען אספרה כל תהילתך בשערי בת ציון, הגילה בישועתך.
Lema'an, so that, or in order to, asapra. Now we had this word before, that lisaper can mean to speak. Samech, pei, resh. That shoresh can mean to speak, to tell a story. It's also the word for sefer, book. It also means the shoresh is the same shoresh for to cut hair. So, but this does not mean cutting hair here. I don't think in biblical Hebrew, that's a very interesting question. I only think modern Hebrew uses it that way, but that I'm not sure about. Learning Hebrew, that was very confusing for me, how that same shoresh means to cut hair and to speak or tell a story. Or okay, but as I said, maybe it's because people who cut hair talk a lot. You know, the idea of a barber is somebody who can tell a good story. Anyway, so I don't know why. So, so that I will, the aleph prefix there is a verbal, that tells a Hebrew speaker or reader that it's taking this root and turning it into a verb. We know the shoresh very well as a noun, sefer, or a sipur. Those are both, a sipur is a story, sefer is a book. But that aleph in the beginning immediately tells us, this can't be a noun, or it's unlikely to be a noun. If there's a mem in the beginning of a word, it's likely to be a noun. So there's a show. So if I saw a mem in front of this shoresh, well, there are a lot of mispar. A mem in the beginning is a good indicator. It's a noun. An aleph in the beginning, good indicator. It's a verb, and it's a first person, what modern Hebrew would call future, biblical Hebrew would call imperfect. So asapra, so that I will tell, or you see this translation, I might tell, kol tehilotecha. Now, this is Sefer Tehillim. This is the word for Tehillim. So here's a good example of that weak letter disappearing. The root of the word Tehillim is Hey Lamed Yud, probably. It might be Hey Lamed Hey. That there are a lot of debates about those issues. But in either case, a Hey or a Yud is a weak letter. So it disappears in various forms of declension, and a Hey often turns into a Taf when you're adding suffixes or making it plural or doing all different things. It usually, when there's a Taf at the end of a word, it usually means there was a Hey before. In the magic of Hebrew grammar, the Hey goes bye-bye and a Taf appears. So the shoresh though is not Tehillah Techa, your praise. So Sefer Tehillim really does mean a book of praises or exaltation. So Techa though, the ending is your praise. Cha at the ending is your. Somebody asked in chat actually last week about sometimes we see it without the cha ending and it's ech. Classically, ech does mean feminine and cha means masculine, but in biblical Hebrew, not always. And in rabbinic Hebrew, almost never. So for instance, in rabbinic Hebrew, the ech ending, which we assume in modern Hebrew is feminine, can also mean masculine. But if you look at the CBST Siddur, you will see that in Yedid Nefesh, we use the ech ending instead of the cha ending because David Berger, the cantor David Berger, found in the JTS library a manuscript which showed that that psalm or that song, that piyut, the religious poem, originally, because it was rabbinic Hebrew, probably had the ech ending. We put it in because a modern Hebrew speaker would immediately think of that was referring to a female god language. Probably the original author did not mean that as female god language, but we liked the ambiguity of it. So if you look at the CBST Siddur, there is a comment also where we explain it for the Yedid Nefesh, which is near the beginning of the Siddur. That's just a little. So the endings in biblical and rabbinic Hebrew are a little less rigid than they are in modern Hebrew. Although modern Hebrew, which is now being queerified by the queer community in Israel, is doing lots of fun things with these endings that those of us who studied Hebrew in Hebrew schools in the 50s or 60s learned were so rigid. So it's fun to see there's a lot of different things going on. In general, spoken language gets simplified in general. So a modern Hebrew speaker, for instance, using the masculine plural for everything, doesn't think about it really as masculine. A modern Hebrew speaker, it's just language simplifies. There's almost never any use. I don't know, Yael, have you ever used the plural feminine ending for
Only if the entire audience is female.
Yeah, it's just and it's not really, people don't really think about it. But you would do it even if the audience was female, the entire audience.
Yeah, yes.
But for and so it's disappearing in modern Hebrew. People are just, because what happens when people are actually speakers and not just studying language, when you speak language, you want to simplify it. People start to cut out distinctions. But anyway, but queer Hebrew now exists, and there's a lot of play with gender in modern Hebrew by the younger queer community. So b'sharei, here's the word shar, again, for gate, repeating. So this is a contrast. Up above in 14, we have sharei mavet, the gates of death. Here are sharei bat Zion, the gates of bat Zion. That literally means the daughter of Zion. Here they translate it as fair Zion. Let's look at it how other translations. But for sure, it's a contrast to Sha'arei Mavet. You know, there's something positive about this image as opposed to images of the gates of death. Agila b'shuatecha. I will exalt Beshua. Yeshua, again, we've come across this several times, is deliverance, redemption. Remember this word Yeshua, which is Yud, Shin, Ayin. For Christians throughout the Bible and throughout the Psalms, it definitely has sounds of being saved. Okay, 16. We're going to finish this and then I'll open it up to questions or comments. So today we'll get through just the basic Hebrew. Oopsie. Oh yeah, sorry.
גויים בשחת עשו, ברשת זו טמנו נלכדה רגלם.
Okay, now we're going back to, the center of the psalm had the contrast with kind of good, and now we're going back to negative, so to speak. Tavu means tvilan, means tavu, that sink.
Drown.
Okay, what?
Drown.
Drown. Goyim. Now remember, two words for peoples. Goyim or goyim for those who are Yiddish or English speakers, and goyim if you're a Hebrew speaker, a modern Hebrew speaker. Goy is a singular, goyim are plural. I wouldn't say, and I'll repeat this, in biblical Hebrew, it doesn't have quite the same resonance that when Yiddish speaking Jews use goyim, but it definitely doesn't mean Jews. But it means nations. So the nations drown, b'shachat asu, in the, well, let's just use this for now. Pit they have made, and yes, that's a contrast to sha'ar, gates. They have made asu. This is the word oseh, like oseh shalom, asiya, many ma'aseh, ma'asim tovim, all the same. And again, it's an ayin samech hey or yud root, and that yud and hey is a weak letter, so it disappears. And in the verb, it's asu. They made bereshet zu tamanu nilk da raglam. Their own foot, raglam, regel shelahem. So that last word is a regel, is a foot or a leg. And the mem ending is a shortening of shelahem, of theirs or theirs. So their own foot is caught in the net they have hidden. Okay, let's keep going. I'm going to boogie through this so we can then start to get into the depth of it.
נודע אדוני משפט עשה בפועל כפיו נוקש רשע היגיון סלע.
Now this is also very interesting structure here. So noda. This is a verb. Oh, I forgot to keep looking at the acrostic, but noda. This is from the Shoresh Yud Dayan. Yud Dalet Ayin. I conflated the two letters. Again, the Yud is weak, so it disappears. And Noda is a passive past tense. So Noda was known. So this would be in kind of exclamation marks or in bold. Was known, comma or pause, bigger than comma. Yud He Vav He. God has made himself. Okay, God has made himself known. Mishpat. So this is very interesting, and we'll need a little. This will have some. These are very interesting. Tamim here. How did Mishpat asa b'foel kapav? So Mishpat has made himself known. He works judgment. Mishpat. Remember we talked about Beit HaMishpat is a court. Judgment is a Mishpat is a sentence or a law or. So he works judgment. Asa b'foel kapav. The wicked man is snared. So here is the Rasha. Nokesh is snared by his own devices. So the first three set and higayon. Remember we came across higayon. We don't really know what that means. Sela. We don't really know what that means. It's possible that both are musical terms or some kind of descriptions of how to sing this or to read it. All right. I'm going to hold off on hands until we finish this because we're very close, and then we'll go back to all questions and discussions. Okay, folks? So 18.
ישובו רשעים לשאולה כל גויים שכחי אלוהים.
Okay, so we've had Sha'ol before. This is a very weird word to say Lisha'olah. I mean, I'm not sure that exists anywhere else. So, Yashuvu, so Sha'ol means some kind of afterlife. We don't, hell it's sometimes translated as. You'll see a lot of Jews just translated as Sha'ol because we don't really know what it is. So, but it's some kind of afterlife, some kind of after death place. And in the form lih means two or four, so it's directional. And hey sometimes is added for directional also, like you would say
הביתה.
or negba means toward the Negev, but you don't say lih negba. You would just say negba. So it's a little bit of a double, maybe it's intensive. Artsa means toward Israel, toward the land, negba, etc. It's. Do you say that in modern Hebrew, Yael? It's very biblical.
No, you do. You say הביתה. אני הולכת
Going
הביתה.
towards my house. Right, exactly. Good point. Okay. Yashuvu, again, the word shuv or shav. Shin yud vet is the shoresh. They live or they stay. So let the rishaim, again, one of the words for evil or bad. Rasha. Let the evil or bad people or the wicked bad go toward or be in Sha'ul, comma, kol goyim shechachei, who have forgotten Elohim. So that's a definition of what Risha'im means, forgotten God. And remember, always Risha'im, all the oyev, enemies, bad people can either be internal or external. Never forget that. Okay, yeah.
כי לא לנצח ישכח אביון, תקוות ענבים או עניים, תאבד לעד.
So now that we see a lot in this psalm, one thing about biblical poetry is when you see a word or a root repeated frequently or with some frequency, one could say it's functioning a little bit like a leitmotif, that you would look at that word and try and understand there's a underlying subliminal message that the author is giving us, and you want to pay attention when something's repeated more than twice. And here we have this word for forget. This seems to be repeated frequently. Kilo, it will always not be successful that the needy shall be ignored, nor the hope of the afflicted forever lost. Let's leave the language for now. Let's keep going. We have one more.
Two more.
Oh, two more.
קומה אדוני אל יעוז אנוש, ישפטו גויים על פניך.
Kuma Adonai, get up, lakum. Get up. We see this a lot when we're beseeching God. kind of get away from where you've been hidden. Kuma, get up, be visible, help now. Kuma, Yud-Hey Vav-Hey. Don't let, here's the word Oz for powerful or strong. Remember I said the Oz moving company in New York City is an Israeli moving company, and they picked the word because Oz means strong. So of course you want a moving company with a lot of strong guys in it, I guess. Al Ya'oz. Enosh. Here's our word for enosh, which those of you in the chorus know so well. Very biblical word for humanity, or for a larger word than just person. Let not humanity have power. Yishaftu goyim al panecha. Again, the word shofet, or mishpat, beit mishpat, the word for judgment or court or send the. Again, another word that's been repeated. I'm going to ask you to think about which are the words, if you were just to pull out the words that come up a lot, more than once or twice. This is going to be one of them. Judgment. Goyim al panecha. Let the nations be judged in your presence. Panecha. Panim is literally face, right? Everybody knows that word. Punim is from this word panim. So it means let the nations be judged in your presence, in your face. In other words, facing you. Okay, they didn't make this 21, but it is actually 21.
Shita Adonai mora lahem yed'u goyim enosh hema sela.
So strike fear into them. Yud Hey Vav Hey. Mora. So mora is from the shoresh for yirah. Yud Resh. So means for fear, not for lahem.
Except I would write it with an aleph, mora with an aleph, if
Well,
it
that's a
comes
good
from.
point. Correct.
Yeah, mora with a hey is to instruct, it's to teach.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, let me think more about that. Very interesting. Good point, Yael. Yedu goyim, let the nations know. What should the nations know? Enosh hema. They are just people. In other words, they're not God. They're not. What's the distinction between knowing that we're human and that we're God? Because we're not God. Selah. Again, our Selah. Okay, so we've got our 21 verses, the longest psalm we've encountered. Now I'll take questions and comments, and then we'll start. If we have, well, maybe it'll be tomorrow. We'll go into some of the different translations.
So I need to tell you that as I'm sharing my screen, I cannot see the chat.
Okay,
and
I
cannot see
but
hands.
People, raise your hand, and I will.
I can see hands now if you want me to go in order.
Yes, let's go in order and try and be brief, just because we have a lot of people that I think want to say something.
All right, Shep, you're first. Unmute yourself.
Okay, I just have two questions. It always what's interesting to me is in Hebrew, they don't seem to have a difference between a regel being a foot or a leg. So regel is the whole thing, or what?
Yep, the whole thing.
The other thing is in the 21st verse there is shita, strike. That's not related to the Hebrew word shvita, to go on strike, is it?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Good question, though. Good question.
All right, Steven's iPad is next. Unmute yourself.
Hello. Excuse my COVID hairdo right now. Mine is. Oh, I'm sorry. You know, if it's too long, I can go on to tomorrow. But mine is about a commentary that I found from one of the Christian.
So let's hold on to commentaries.
Okay, that's
hold
fine.
on till tomorrow. I want to kind of see if there's.
No problem. I'll do it tomorrow.
Let's see today if there's language or kind of first responses that you have to this overall psalm.
Lisa Brown.
I was just wondering, in terms of the acrostic, if there was any scholarship done that might point to a missing pasuk, a missing verse that might have been associated with a letter that was, it seems sort of counterintuitive that they would make an acrostic and skip a letter.
They do that. There are some other psalms where we know that happens. Shep, you got to stop moving around. It's making me dizzy. Shep, could you stay still? It really makes me, thank you. I was like, woo, woo. Thank you, Shep. You got to, this is what I mean. Your Zoom presentation affects everybody.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, you
I'm
can't
not
do
jumping
that.
off the bridge.
Okay, but even the moving around makes me a little dizzy. Sorry, Lisa, about the acrostic. Well, it happens a lot. I hate to tell you. This is not uncommon. We never know if we've actually lost something in scribal error, in scribal passages, but it's not unusual. So we don't, what we would imagine should be a, very consistent thing. Maybe it wasn't in those days. You know what I mean? We have to be careful not to impose, but it doesn't mean you're wrong. We just don't know. And it's not that unusual. There are other acrostics where there are some acrostics where it's much more, this one you have to jump a few verses even sometimes. But they just skip one sometimes, and we just don't know. There is no way to know it. But it does seem counterintuitive that why would they skip but there's no way to know. But there are other people who talk more about the acrostic, and I think that Levy does. So we'll look at that for tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll start with looking at Levy because Simon and Sherry, see Levy footnote 2. All right, we'll talk about that tomorrow more.
Betsy Immershine.
Hi, thanks. I noticed in this psalm, verse 15 and 1 earlier, the beginning word is not capitalized, and normally in
Say that again, Betsy. Could you start again? Sorry.
Sure.
I was looking at the wrong verse.
Verse 15, and there's a verse earlier that the first word in English is lowercase, where everything else the first word is there a reason for that? It's not typical.
Well, when you're doing something lowercase in English, it's a translator's decision. Hebrew, remember, does not have upper or lowercase for the beginning of words. So sometimes a translator is trying to indicate that the verse is just a continuation of the verse before, in the way you would do in English in a poem where you really want to indicate just continuity. But you'll see different translators. Levy, you're talking about 16, 15, and 16. Levy has them capitalized.
But it's not typical in this version that the new verse starts lowercase.
So whoever wrote this version, which I don't think we have, whoever that person is, sees 15 is just an extension of 14. So is trying to make that point.
Okay.
Yeah, it's there. Yeah. So that for them, it's clearly a run-on sentence as opposed to a separate pasuk.
So why would they not have? Why break up the verse and make it separate verses? Because sometimes we see a few phrases, like a verse could have several.
I think they're trying to indicate that the psalm itself is traditionally known to be a separate psalm, a separate verse. So I think the translator is trying to acknowledge that, but say that they believe it should be read as a continuation of the verse before.
Okay, thanks.
Safari, whoever's doing this Safari is trying to make sure it's close to the Hebrew so that you can do the translation easily. But I think they're trying to indicate they see it. And there's a reason. Lama'an is a word that could be used as a run-on sentence, so to speak, rather than a whole new sentence. In fact, I'm not even sure it would be so often used as to open a sentence. It's a little, because it's indicating the sentence before. So I think that's why they're doing it that way.
Ben Shafran.
On verse 21, the issue of Moab, whether it's Aleph or Hey,
yeah,
actually can be Hey if you take it as teach them that they are only human and not gods.
Yes, that's beautiful. Yeah, so that I agree with you. So you and your L, I think I would go with your reading of it.
Catherine Keenan.
Hi, I had a question about verse 21, and it's the word fear. I know that in the Christian tradition, in the King James Version, it's often mistranslated and it means awe. And I'm wondering, is there a different Hebrew word for awe instead of fear? Because it's a major difference in
well,
what
and
means.
that's what we were just talking about. Yael and Ben are saying we should actually, there's a different Hebrew word with a different shoresh. And this, they would argue, and I have to say I'm compelled by them. I'm going to study it a little bit more today. but they would argue that it should not be that word for awe. Although, and again, I'll say to you, Biblical Hebrew loves the homonym stuff, because even if you might technically argue it should be translated a certain way, sometimes a homonym in Hebrew used to evoke, because remember, if this was an oral tradition, people would think about, possibilities that wouldn't necessarily if you were studying the Shoresh. So homonyms don't mean you should reject out of hand. It just means maybe there's a range of ideas that the poet is encouraging you to feel. But in Hebrew, fear, terror, awe are all combined. And I would say context. So like we call the days of awe, Yamim Noraim, which is this other Shoresh that I went for first, but I'm now being corrected. But Yamim Noraim, we call it days of awe. And for sure it includes fear. Fear, I think, I think it's a little generational too, that I think that we're less into the word fear in relationship to religion, and awe is a little more comfortable for us. I think in different generations, fear was a more comfortable word.
Right.
But I would not argue a Christian Jewish thing. Jews have used the word fear too. But I personally, because I think I'm of our generation, love the word awe a lot more. But as Sharon Cohen Ennisfeld said when she was with us, you really can't have awe without a little fear. Like she was saying, let's embrace the fear a little bit. And I think that's a little bit, she's saying, we only want the good stuff of awe. And maybe there's actually some strong, difficult feelings with awe too, which is a little fear.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Marcia Melnick, your hand is up.
Okay. Rabbi, you repeat, we shouldn't forget all the words for wicked and for the, enemies and so on. And you always say, don't forget that they can be internal or external. And was it seen as internal in biblical times, or do we even know, or is that just making it more palatable for us?
I would say there's no way to know, but for sure throughout Jewish history, as long as these Psalms have been recited, there has been an understanding that they can be very personal.
But is that a contemporary interpretation? Contemporary meaning maybe in the last couple of 100 years, but not. Because I mean, for me, unless I use that, and of course I can use both.
Yeah.
But typically they're related to enemies of nations, and it's linked often. And we
some Psalms more than others, as we've seen. Some of our Psalms have not connected it as much to other nations, and some Psalms do it more.
Peoples, but
peoples, right.
Rabbi, we have a few more hands, but it is 10:44. Should we go to?
All right, so we're gonna have to pause. Isn't this wonderful? We're not ending this conversation, we're pausing it. We'll pick it up tomorrow and look through the Psalm and look for the words that are repeated and these issues. And we're gonna look at Levi to start tomorrow. So if you have Levi, I think Harold sent them out to everybody, right? We're going to look at Levi and Alter in the next couple, and Bernstein. So those are the three. If you want to, now that we've gone through it once, look at those three and we'll talk about them together. And Yael, you did a terrific job today. Let's hear it for our TA today. Yay. Thank you, Yael.
All right, and we'll start our conversation tomorrow with a lowercase letter to imply continuity. Okay, so this is, again, Esmecha ve'el tzavach, I will rejoice and exalt. Esmecha ve'el tzavach, zamera shimcha elyon. Esmecha ve'el tzavach, zamera shimcha elyon. Ode havaya b'chol libi, ספר כל נפלאותיך, עוד הוויה בכל ליבי, אספרה כל נפלאותיך, אשמחה ואל צווח, זמרה שמך עליון. אשמח ואל צווח הזמרה שמך עליון. עוד הוויה בכל ליבי, אספרה כל נפלותיך. עוד הוויה בכל ליבי, אספרה כל נפלותיך. אשמח ואל צווח הזמרה שמך עליון. אשמח ואל צווח הזמרה שמך עליון. הזמרה שמך עליון. הזמרה שמך עליון.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was beautiful, Jacob. Thank you all for studying with us today. I'm so happy to be with all of you. Really, what a wonderful way to start the day today. All right, everybody. Oh, tonight, Town Hall. For all who are members of CBST, should be fabulous. Nate Goldstein and Jackie Weingarten Arams, Randy's sister, are going to talk about medical issues around COVID. Jackie is a pediatrician, a pediatric intensivist who works at Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx. So she's going to speak about COVID from the perspective of somebody who took care of a lot of very sick children and talk about issues around COVID and kids. And Nate will talk about, he takes care of very sick older adults. And just kind of an update. Remember, Nate was our first town hall way back at the beginning. So he's going to kind of do an update since then. Should be fantastic. If you are a member and haven't gotten the information, write to info@cbst.org. The email went out on Friday, and then at 5 o'clock today, we'll send out the code or the password or whatever to sign on. It's from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock tonight, not 6 o'clock, because there's a class at 6 o'clock. So the town hall is at 7 o'clock tonight. We'll go back to 6 o'clock in August, but we didn't want to conflict with the class. So please join us. If you're not a member of CBST, join. Please, people, join the synagogue. And we have no financial barriers to joining. We're not like another synagogue where you have to pay a certain amount. Everybody gets to figure out what they can meaningfully give so that CBST can survive and thrive. So join if you want to. And tonight we have a town hall for members. Love everybody. Bye-bye. See you tonight at the town hall.